Imagine a world where, overnight, every human loses the ability to tell a lie. It's not just that people choose to be honest, it's that they physically cannot say anything untrue. Whether it's a world leader discussing policies, a child explaining why homework isn't done, or two friends talking about their weekend plans, absolute honesty would rule. This sudden global phenomenon would have immediate, profound effects on society. Relationships built on half-truths or comfort lies would either grow stronger or collapse completely. Politicians, used to spinning their narratives, would be forced to reveal real intentions. Corporate executives could no longer exaggerate quarterly results. Even small social exchanges, "I'm fine, you look great," would be stripped of their comforting filters. Would the world improve because trust would skyrocket, or would the brutal honesty shatter the delicate social contracts that hold society together? This thought experiment isn't just fascinating, it strikes at the very core of human behavior. Lies, both big and small, grease the wheels of our daily interactions. Without them, we would face the raw, unvarnished reality of how people truly feel and what they truly think. Would you want to live in such a world? Would it be liberating or would it be devastating? Think about your daily life. Every conversation, every interaction, being 100% truthful. No white lies, no bending the truth for kindness, no masks to protect feelings. Just pure, sometimes painful truth. As we dive deeper into this crazy scenario, I want you to imagine yourself in that world. And leave a comment below. Fire. Would you be happier or more miserable if everyone always told the truth? Let's talk about it. In a world where everyone can only speak the truth, personal relationships would experience a seismic shift. Think about how often small lies are used to maintain harmony. "No, that outfit doesn't make you look bad," or "I'm not upset, it's nothing." These minor deceptions, often told to spare feelings, are deeply embedded in human interaction. Without them, every emotion, every fleeting thought would be laid bare. Couples would no longer be able to hide dissatisfaction or mask disinterest. Friendships based on convenience or habit might crumble when one person admits they find the other boring or annoying. Even family gatherings, already stressful for many, could turn into battlegrounds of brutally honest opinions and long-repressed grievances. Yet while many relationships might break under the weight of unfiltered truth, some would become stronger. Authenticity could lead to a deeper level of trust, where people know exactly where they stand with each other. No second-guessing intentions, no decoding passive-aggressive comments, just raw, straightforward honesty. Over time, people might adapt, learning to handle honesty with grace and resilience. Society might prioritize emotional intelligence and communication skills more than ever before. However, the initial shock would be massive. Divorce rates could spike, childhoods could become harsher, and friendships could disintegrate overnight. Would it be worth it for the sake of true connection? It's an intriguing question. Politics would be utterly transformed if every politician, diplomat, and public servant was forced to speak only the truth. Campaign promises would be exposed for what they really are, strategies for winning votes rather than genuine commitments. Politicians would have no choice but to admit when policies serve the interests of certain groups at the expense of others. They could no longer mask failures behind excuses or spin scandals into minor mistakes. Imagine a press conference where a leader admits, "We entered this war for financial gain," or "This policy is primarily to help big donors, not the public." Trust in government might initially plummet as citizens are confronted with the often self-serving reality of politics. However, over time the political system could fundamentally reform. With deception impossible, transparency would be the only path forward. Voters would make decisions based on real intentions, not empty promises. Corruption would become nearly impossible to conceal. Yet the transition wouldn't be smooth. International relations could become incredibly tense. Diplomats often rely on half-truths, omissions, and strategic ambiguity to navigate sensitive negotiations. Without the ability to sugarcoat or sidestep tough issues, alliances could fracture and conflicts could escalate. Would nations be willing to admit historical wrongdoings openly? Would peace treaties be easier or harder to negotiate when every party's true intentions are laid bare? What do you think? Would honest politicians fix the world, or destroy it faster? Drop your thoughts below. And if you're enjoying this thought experiment, hit that like button to support the channel. Imagine going to buy a car, and the salesperson can't exaggerate about the vehicle's performance. Every flaw, every hidden issue must be disclosed. In such a world, advertising as we know it would collapse. Marketers, unable to make grandiose claims, would have to stick to the raw, unembellished truth. This toothpaste slightly whitens your teeth after 6 months, would replace, get a dazzling smile instantly. As businesses are often built on branding, perception, and emotional appeal, many industries would struggle to adapt. Companies could no longer hide behind greenwashing or pretend their products are more eco-friendly than they are. Financial markets would become more stable since insider trading, misleading earnings reports, and investor deception would vanish. However, the transition would wreak havoc initially. Stocks could crash as companies' real values, stripped of marketing spin, are revealed. Negotiations between businesses, mergers, acquisitions, partnerships, would become much more straightforward but also harsher. There would be no room for tactful evasion or playing hardball with half-truths. Contracts would be written with brutal honesty. Would businesses that focus on real value survive and thrive, creating a more sustainable and ethical economy? Probably. But the initial years would see massive collapses, job losses, and a lot of societal turmoil as false fronts disappear. Education would be drastically different in a world where truth is mandatory. Teachers would no longer sugarcoat student performance with phrases like, "You're doing fine," when a student is clearly struggling. Brutal honesty would mean telling a child, "You need to work harder because you're falling behind," without any cushioning. While this might seem harsh, it could foster a much more results-driven and efficient education system. Students would receive direct, actionable feedback without mixed messages, potentially allowing them to improve faster. However, the psychological effects on young minds could be devastating if not handled with care. Self-esteem issues could spike as children are told openly how they compare to their peers. Teachers would need to develop incredible emotional intelligence and diplomatic truth-telling skills, being honest but also constructive. The grading system itself would evolve. Instead of inflated grades designed to preserve morale, honest assessments would prevail. Schools would focus less on rote memorization and standardized testing, and more on actual learning and critical thinking. Moreover, students would also tell the truth to teachers. Imagine classrooms where kids openly state, "This lesson is boring," or, "I don't understand anything you just said." This could push educators to constantly improve their methods, or it might make teaching an unbearable profession for many. Universities and colleges would also face a reality check. No longer could they oversell degrees with promises of guaranteed career success. Students would enroll in programs fully aware of real-world job prospects, salary expectations, and potential hardships. In today's world, much of media and entertainment relies on embellishment, dramatization, or outright fabrication to capture attention. In a truth-only world, this would be impossible. News channels would have to abandon sensationalism. There would be no biased reporting, only raw, unfiltered facts. News would likely become much less entertaining but far more reliable. The concept of fake news would disappear overnight because it simply couldn't exist. In entertainment, storytelling would still thrive. After all, fiction is different from lying, but marketing would change. Trailers for movies couldn't exaggerate their greatness. A mediocre film would be advertised as an average experience with some good moments, instead of the blockbuster of the year. Celebrities would have to be honest about their lifestyles, mistakes, and controversies. Public figures could no longer pretend to be perfect role models. Social media influencers would be particularly impacted. They could no longer fake perfect lives, flawless skin, or extravagant wealth. Audiences would see them for who they truly are. Ordinary people with flaws and struggles. This could actually build more genuine connections between content creators and their fans. On the darker side, without the ability to mask intentions, many hidden agendas in media would be exposed. Media companies' true motives, profit, political bias, or sensationalism, would come to light. Trust in media could either skyrocket, due to the newfound honesty, or collapse entirely during the initial revelation period. Technology companies are notorious for making lofty promises about their latest innovations. From smartphones that revolutionize your life, to gadgets that change the world, marketing hype is baked into the industry. In a world where only truth is allowed, tech companies would have to tone down their messaging dramatically. Launch events would feature more modest, realistic descriptions. This update improves battery life slightly but won't significantly impact your experience. Artificial intelligence would undergo a major change too. AI systems designed to mimic human conversation often include polite evasions, carefully chosen language, or even programmed white lies to maintain user comfort. In a truth-only society, AI would be programmed to deliver nothing but brutal, direct truths. Imagine asking your smart assistant how you look today and receiving, "You look tired and disheveled," instead of the usual neutral response. Customer service bots would tell you outright if you're being unreasonable rather than trying to placate you. Also, tech giants could no longer pretend that user data is only collected to improve services. They would have to openly admit the extent of data harvesting and exactly how it's monetized. This could lead to massive public outrage and perhaps force companies into more ethical business models. Research and innovation might actually speed up since internal corporate lies, like hiding project failures, would no longer be possible. Honest discussions about what works and what doesn't would save time, money, and lives. International diplomacy today is built on a complex web of carefully chosen words, half-truths, and strategic omissions. World leaders often say one thing publicly while pursuing entirely different agendas behind closed doors. But in a world where everyone had to tell the truth, diplomacy would be completely redefined. Leaders would openly admit their country's interests without sugarcoating. Negotiations would be brutally honest with phrases like, "We want this alliance only because it benefits us economically," replacing empty speeches about shared values and global friendship. This honesty could initially lead to massive tensions. Old alliances might crumble overnight once countries realize how little they actually trust or value each other. Conflicts could spike because the polite lies that usually delay confrontations would vanish. However, over time, new, stronger alliances could form, based on genuine, aligned interests rather than fake pleasantries. International organizations like the United Nations would face an existential crisis. How could they operate when member nations openly admit their self-centered motives? Trade agreements would become clearer but far more cutthroat. Countries would state directly, "We agree to this because we're desperate for your oil," instead of hiding behind economic jargon. Foreign aid would either be drastically reduced or at least explained honestly, "We're providing this aid because we want influence over your government." While the early days would be chaotic, a new global order could emerge, one based on brutal honesty rather than constant suspicion. In the long run, this might even reduce wars as nations could no longer deceive each other into false senses of security. Living in a world where everyone speaks the truth would deeply affect personal freedom and mental health. On one hand, people would finally be free from the burden of maintaining facades. No more fake smiles at parties. No more pretending to agree just to avoid conflict. Everyone could live authentically, knowing that others are doing the same. This raw honesty could be incredibly liberating, allowing deeper, more meaningful relationships to flourish. On the other hand, constant exposure to unfiltered opinions could severely strain people's mental health. Imagine hearing every single negative thought people have about you. "You're annoying," "You're not as smart as you think you are," "You're gaining weight." These brutally honest observations would hurt no matter how strong you think you are. Mental health services would become even more crucial in such a society. Therapists would be overwhelmed as people seek help dealing with the daily psychological wounds inflicted by unfiltered honesty. Therapy itself would also change. Patients would no longer lie to therapists, and therapists would no longer soften their feedback. This could accelerate healing for some, but devastate others who aren't prepared for such raw confrontation. Moreover, people might start choosing isolation over socialization to protect themselves from emotional pain. Communities could become more fragmented, with individuals sticking only to those who truly value and accept them. As we've seen throughout this exploration, a world where everyone speaks the truth would be both fascinating and terrifying. Honesty would create unparalleled transparency in relationships, business, government, and global affairs. Misunderstandings would decrease, and real problems could be addressed head-on without the endless layers of deception. But this world would also be brutal. Many social bonds are delicately balanced on small, harmless lies. Without them, friendships could shatter, families could divide, and workplaces could implode. Trust might initially erode because we would finally see the real opinions people hold about us. and they might not always be flattering. At the same time, society could eventually adapt. Over time, people might grow thicker skin, learning to accept criticism gracefully and to value sincerity over comfort. New cultural norms could evolve, teaching people how to deliver truth compassionately. Tactful honesty could become one of the most valued social skills, replacing today's culture of polite evasion. In many ways, humanity's survival in a brutally honest world would depend on our ability to balance truth with empathy. Being honest doesn't have to mean being cruel. If we could master compassionate truth-telling, society might actually become healthier, more resilient, and more connected than ever before.